They were already preparing to bury her while she was still breathing. The rain fell in thin, icy sheets across the empty road, turning the dirt into a slick mirror that reflected the cold lantern light. And in the middle of it all lay Clara Whitmore, her body trembling faintly beneath a worn cotton dress that clung to her skin, her breath shallow, uneven, barely visible in the night air as a circle of townspeople stood at a distance, like witnesses to something they didn't want to understand. No one stepped forward, no one spoke loud enough to stop what was happening, because in this place, once a name was stained, it never washed clean, and Clara had been marked guilty hours ago, accused of stealing a silver heirloom no one could prove she had ever touched, yet no one questioned it either. Her hands pressed weakly into the mud, as if the earth itself might steady her, but even now, with strength slipping through her fingers, she held on to one thing: her silence. She could have spoken, she could have pointed to the truth, but she didn't, because it wasn't hers to expose, and somewhere deep inside that fading heartbeat, she chose kindness over survival. The wind shifted, then abruptly stopped, not softened, not faded, stopped completely, like the world itself had paused to listen. A low hum followed, the kind that didn't belong to any engine these people had ever heard, and at the edge of the road, where there had been nothing seconds before, a black carriage stood still as if it had always been there. No horse, no sound, no arrival, just presence. And then he stepped out, Victor Blackthorne, tall, impossibly still, his pale skin catching the dim light in a way that felt wrong, too smooth, too perfect, his long dark hair brushing against the collar of a coat that seemed to drink in the shadows around it. And when his eyes lifted, faintly red beneath heavy lids, something invisible tightened across the entire crowd. No one moved, no one dared to breathe. He didn't look at them, he didn't need to, his focus locked onto the woman in the mud as he walked forward. Each step deliberate, silent, until he reached her side, and without hesitation, without question, he knelt, his hand closing around her wrist. And for a moment, everything stilled, the rain, the air, the fear. "This one is not yours to bury," he said quietly, his voice calm, but absolute. Clara's eyelids fluttered once, her lips barely parting, as a whisper slipped free. "Victor, you came back." And in that single breath, something ancient shifted, because no one in that town knew that name except him. The silence did not break after she said his name. It deepened, stretching across the muddy road, like something alive pressing into every chest, every thought, every doubt. Victor Blackthorne did not move at first, his fingers still wrapped around Clara's fragile wrist, as if confirming something only. He could feel her pulse was faint, almost gone, yet beneath it, there was another rhythm, older, slower, like an echo from a forgotten time. His eyes darkened, the faint red glow sharpening as the air around him grew colder, not harsh, not violent, just absolute, the kind of cold that erased everything unnecessary. He looked down at her again, truly looked. This time rain clinging to her lashes, mud streaked across her cheek, her breathing uneven, but stubborn, as if refusing to disappear, even when the world had already decided she should say that again. His voice was quieter now, not a command, but something closer to disbelief. Clara did not answer. Her strength had already slipped too far, her head tilting slightly as her body gave in to the pull of unconsciousness. But the mark had already been made, the name had already been spoken, and Victor knew. There were no accidents left in his world. Behind him, the townspeople shifted uneasily. Someone tried to speak, tried to reclaim control of a moment that no longer belonged to them. "She is one of ours," a man said, his voice lacking conviction. "Whatever she has done, we will deal with it here." Victor did not turn, he did not acknowledge the words, because they no longer mattered. Instead, his hand moved, brushing away the wet dirt from Clara's wrist, and that was when it appeared, faint at first, barely visible beneath her skin, a shape, like intertwined thorns circling into a crown. The lines pulsed once, then again, glowing with a dim red light that did not belong to the human world. Victor's breath stilled for a fraction of a second. 300 years, and he had never seen that mark again, not since the night everything had ended. The crowd felt it, even if they did not understand it, the shift, the weight, the quiet certainty that something irreversible had just begun. Victor rose slowly, lifting Clara into his arms with effortless precision, her body light against the dark fall of his coat, as if she had always belonged there. A few voices rose again, uncertain, louder now, but still fragile. "You cannot just take her." Victor finally turned, his gaze sweeping across them, not angry, not rushed, simply final. And in that single look, every protest died. "I already have," he said, and with that he stepped back toward the waiting carriage, the door opening before he reached it. As if responding to his will alone, the moment he crossed the threshold, the cold lifted, the rain resumed, and the world exhaled again. But Clara Whitmore was already gone, and in Victor's arms something ancient had just awakened. The carriage did not rattle or sway as it moved. Instead, it glided forward with a smoothness that felt unnatural, as if the road itself bent to allow it passage. Inside the dim interior, Victor Blackthorne sat in absolute stillness, Clara Whitmore resting against him, her head tilted slightly toward his shoulder, her breathing faint but steady, now stronger than it had been moments before, yet still fragile, like a flame caught between wind and darkness. The air carried a faint scent of rain and something older, something that did not belong to the modern world. Victor's gaze remained fixed on her wrist, where the mark pulsed softly beneath her skin, each glow slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat that did not match her own. He had seen that mark once before, not in a dream, not in a story, but in a memory buried so deep he had spent centuries pretending it did not exist. His fingers hovered just above the symbol, not touching, not yet, as if contact might confirm something he was not ready to face. "It cannot be you," he said. Under his breath, the words quiet but heavy, as though they carried the weight of years. Clara stirred slightly, her brow tightening, as if she could hear him even in unconsciousness. Her hand shifted barely enough for her fingers to brush against the fabric of his coat, and in that brief contact the mark flared brighter, the red glow deepening into something almost alive. Victor's eyes sharpened immediately, his control tightening as the carriage darkened around them, shadows gathering along the edges of the space, responding to him instinctively, protectively. The driver did not turn, did not speak. No one interrupted the silence that followed, because something had changed, and even the night recognized it. "You spoke my name," Victor continued, his voice lower, now more focused. "Not the name they whisper, not the one they fear, but the one I buried." He leaned slightly closer, studying her face, every detail, every line, as if searching for something that time should have erased, but had not. Clara's lips parted faintly, another whisper escaping, though softer this time, broken by exhaustion. "I waited." The words were barely there, more breath than sound, yet they struck him harder than any blade could have. His hand finally lowered, brushing lightly against her wrist, and the moment he made contact, the mark responded fully, lines of crimson light spreading outward in a delicate pattern before settling back into the shape of a crown. Victor closed his eyes for the briefest second, and when he opened them again, the hesitation was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, certain. "Then this world made a mistake," he said quietly as the carriage passed beyond the last flicker of town lights into complete darkness. "Because I remember how your story ends, and it was not supposed to begin again." The carriage slowed without warning, not from resistance, but from arrival. The motion simply ceased, as if the distance had decided it was complete. Outside the windows, darkness gave way to towering silhouettes, stone rising like a forgotten monument against the night. Victor Blackthorne did not move immediately, his gaze still resting on Clara Whitmore, as though the world beyond the carriage no longer held relevance. Her breathing had steadied more now, each inhale deeper than before, yet her body remained limp in his arms, caught between sleep and something far older. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, slower this time, but stronger, as if it had found its rhythm within this place. Victor finally lifted his head, and the door opened before his hand reached for it. The cold air that entered was different from the road outside. It carried age, silence, memory, the kind that settled into stone and never left. He stepped out. Without effort, Clara still held securely against him, her presence altering the space around them in subtle ways. The torches along the pathway flickered, not wildly but deliberately, as if acknowledging something long absent. Returning figures emerged from the shadows, not rushing, not questioning, but watching, their eyes reflecting faint silver under the dim light, each one lowering their gaze. As Victor passed, none dared to speak, yet the tension spread quickly. Something had shifted in the balance of their world, and they all felt it. Victor crossed the threshold into the castle, the heavy doors closing behind him, without a sound, sealing away the outside world. Entirely inside, the air was still vast and cold, lined with stone that seemed to absorb even the echo of footsteps. He moved through the hall, without hesitation, as if guided by memory rather than direction, until he reached a chamber deep within where the walls curved inward, and a single narrow window allowed a thin line of pale moonlight to fall across the floor. He lowered Clara gently onto the bed, the dark fabric beneath her contrasting against her pale skin, her hair still damp from the rain. Victor stepped back only slightly, his eyes fixed on her wrist again, the mark glowing faintly beneath the surface as though responding to the room itself to him. He exhaled slowly, not out of exhaustion, but restraint. "You should not be here," he said quietly, more to the past than to her present form. "Not in this lifetime, not in this body." Clara stirred once more, her fingers tightening slightly against the fabric beneath her, and for a moment the mark flared brighter, casting a faint red glow across the stone walls. Victor's expression hardened. Not in anger, but in realization. Something had been set into motion long before this night, something that neither time nor death had erased, and as the light faded back into her skin, he understood one thing with absolute certainty: this was not chance, this was a return. Clara Whitmore woke to silence, not the kind that followed noise, but the kind that existed before sound. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim silver light that filtered through the narrow window. Above her the ceiling stretched high and curved, carved from stone that seemed untouched by time. For a moment she did not move, her body heavy, unfamiliar, as if she had been placed somewhere far beyond her own life. Her fingers twitched against the fabric beneath her, softer than anything she had ever known, and then she felt it, a faint warmth at her wrist. She turned her head slowly, lifting her arm just enough to see it, the mark, the crown of thorns glowing faintly beneath her skin. Her breath caught, not from fear, but recognition, though she did not know why. It felt familiar, like a memory she had never lived. The room shifted slightly as she pushed herself upright, the air colder here, but steady, grounded, unlike the chaos she had left behind. The rain, the voices, the accusations, they felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. And then she saw him. Victor Blackthorne stood near the window, his back partially turned, the faint light outlining his figure in sharp, still lines. He had not moved since she woke. She knew it, without knowing how. "You are not supposed to remember me." His voice broke the silence, low, controlled, yet carrying something deeper beneath it. Clara's throat tightened as she tried to speak, her voice unsteady. "I do not remember, I just—" She stopped, searching for words that would not come, her eyes fixed on him, as if something inside her refused to look away. "I knew your name." Victor turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers, and for the first time, there was no distance, no cold indifference, only focus, precise and unrelenting, as if he were measuring something beyond her physical presence. "Names are not learned that way," he said quietly, stepping closer, each movement deliberate, until he stood at the edge of the bed, close enough for her to see the faint red glow beneath his eyes, the subtle sharpness of his features, the stillness that did not belong to any human being. Clara's heartbeat quickened, but not from fear. Something else, something unfamiliar, pulled at her chest, as if the space between them held weight. "Then why does it feel like I have been here before?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Victor's expression shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough for the air to tighten around them. "Because something of you has," he replied, his gaze dropping briefly to her wrist as the mark pulsed once more, brighter than before, and this time Clara felt it, a warmth spreading through her veins, steady, intentional, like something waking up inside her. Victor's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "And if that mark is real, then you were never meant to be found again." Clara Whitmore felt the warmth spread further beneath her skin, not painful, not overwhelming, but undeniable, like something that had been waiting patiently for her to notice it. Her breath slowed as she looked down at her wrist again, the mark no longer faint, no longer uncertain. It pulsed with quiet intention, as if it recognized where she was and who stood before her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice steadier now, though her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the glowing lines. Victor Blackthorne did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the mark with a focus that carried both certainty and restraint, as if speaking too soon might change what was unfolding. "It is a promise," he said at last, his tone measured, each word chosen carefully. "One that should have ended long before you were born." Clara frowned, the words settling heavily in her mind, not fully understood, yet impossible to ignore. She lowered her hand slowly, her eyes lifting back to him. "Then why does it feel like it belongs to me?" Victor's expression hardened slightly, not in rejection, but in recognition of a truth he had hoped to avoid. "Because it does now," he replied, the simplicity of the answer carrying more weight than explanation ever could. The room seemed to grow quieter around them, as if even the stone walls were listening. Clara shifted on the bed, the soft fabric beneath her unfamiliar against her skin, Everything here felt distant from the life she knew, yet the longer she stayed, the less it felt like a place she did not belong. Her gaze drifted toward the narrow window where the night stretched endlessly beyond the glass. "You took me away from them," she said softly, not accusing, not questioning, simply stating what had happened. Victor stepped closer, the faint sound of his movement, barely noticeable, yet enough to draw her attention back to him. "They had already let you go," he answered, his voice calm but absolute. Clara held his gaze, searching for something, anything that would explain why none of this felt wrong. Why, standing in a place she had never seen beside a man she should fear, felt strangely steady. "And now," she asked quietly, "what happens to me now?" Victor looked at her fully, then no distance, no hesitation, only certainty. "Now," he said, his voice lowering as the faint red glow in his eyes deepened. "You stay where you were always meant to return." Clara's breath caught, not from fear, but from the quiet finality in his words, as the mark on her wrist pulsed once more, stronger than before, and somewhere deep within her something answered. Clara Whitmore felt the words settle into her like a quiet verdict, not forced, not imposed, but accepted by something deeper than thought. The room seemed to respond to that acceptance, the faint glow along the stone walls shifting almost imperceptibly, as if the castle itself had been waiting for her to acknowledge it. She swung her legs slowly over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cold floor. The chill did not startle her, instead it grounded her, pulling her fully into the moment. Victor Blackthorne watched without interruption, his posture unchanged, yet his attention sharpened as she stood for the first time, her balance unsteady for only a second before it corrected itself, as though her body remembered how to exist here. Clara took a small step forward, then another, each movement cautious, but certain, her eyes drifting across the chamber, the high arching ceiling, the carved stone, the narrow line of moonlight that seemed brighter now than before. "This place," she murmured, her voice low but clear, "it does not feel unfamiliar." Victor's gaze followed her movement, his expression unreadable but intent. "It should not," he replied quietly. Clara turned back to him, something in her expression shifting from uncertainty to quiet resolve. "Then tell me what it is," she said, not pleading, not demanding, simply asking for truth. Victor held her gaze for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of the answer against the inevitability of it. "It is where a promise was made," he said finally, "a promise bound by blood and time." Clara's fingers brushed lightly against her wrist again, the mark responding instantly, a faint warmth spreading outward as if reacting to his words. "And I was part of it," she said, the realization forming without hesitation. Victor stepped closer, now the distance between them closing to almost nothing, the air tightening, not with tension, but with something heavier, something older. "You were the reason for it," he corrected her softly. Clara's breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition, the kind that did not need memory to exist, only presence. "Then why do I not remember?" she asked. Victor's eyes darkened slightly, the faint red within them deepening as if stirred by something long buried. "Because remembering would have destroyed you before you had the chance to return," he answered. Clara stood still, absorbing the weight of that truth as the mark on her wrist pulsed again, stronger, brighter, and for the first time the warmth did not stay contained. It moved upward through her arms, steady, deliberate, like a signal being sent. Victor's gaze dropped to the glowing lines, then lifted back to her face, his voice quieter now, but filled with certainty. "It is beginning again." Clara Whitmore felt the words echo inside her, not as sound, but as movement, something shifting into place beneath her skin. The warmth that had risen through her arm now settled deeper, threading through her chest, steady, deliberate, as if aligning her with something unseen. She inhaled slowly, her breath no longer uneven, no longer uncertain, and when she opened her eyes again, the room looked different, not because it had changed, but because she had. Victor Blackthorne did not step back, he did not interrupt. He watched with the stillness of someone who had seen this moment before, yet hoped he never would again. The faint glow in his eyes sharpened as the air around them grew heavier, responding not to him this time, but to her. Clara lifted her hand slowly, turning her wrist toward the dim light. The mark no longer faint, no longer hidden, it pulsed with a quiet authority, the shape more defined now, each line precise, as if it had always existed, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. "It feels like it is calling something," she said, her voice calm, but edged with something new, awareness. Victor's gaze lowered to the mark, then returned to her face, his expression tightening in a way that carried both certainty and warning. "It is not calling something," he replied softly. "It is answering." Clara's breath stilled the distinction, settling heavily as the warmth within her surged once more, stronger this time, spreading outward beyond her arm into her shoulders, her chest, her entire body, not overwhelming, not painful, but undeniable, like a door opening somewhere deep inside her. The torches along the walls flickered in response, the shadows, shifting not randomly, but with intention. As if drawn toward her presence, Clara took a step back, not in fear, but in realization, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, as if seeing it for the first time and understanding it at the same moment. "Then this place," she said slowly. "It has been waiting. Victor did not hesitate for you." He confirmed, his voice lower, now carrying a weight that could not be ignored. Clara turned back to him, her expression no longer uncertain, no longer searching, but focused, as if something within her had finally aligned. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Were you waiting too?" Victor held her gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, not empty, but full of everything unspoken, everything remembered, everything that had been lost and found again. "I was hoping I would not have to," he said at last, and for the first time the truth in his voice carried something dangerously close to vulnerability. Clara felt the warmth settle fully within her, no longer moving, no longer searching. It had found where it belonged, and as the mark pulsed one final time, the room fell completely still, as if the castle itself had acknowledged her return, and in that silence Victor understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had begun tonight would not remain contained within these walls. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt complete, as if something long unfinished had finally reached the point where it could no longer be ignored. Clara Whitmore stood at the center of the chamber, no longer uncertain, no longer questioning. The warmth within her had settled into something steady, something certain, and when she lifted her gaze again, there was no hesitation left in it. Victor Blackthorne recognized it immediately, not because it surprised him, but because it confirmed what he had feared from the very beginning. This was not a coincidence, this was not a mistake, this was a return. "Then it does not end here," Clara said quietly, her voice no longer fragile, no longer searching, but grounded in a truth she did not need to fully understand. Victor did not respond right away, his gaze fixed on her, as if measuring the distance between what she had been and what she was becoming. The faint red in his eyes dimmed slightly, not fading, but focusing, narrowing into something far more controlled. "No," he said at last, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of something far greater than either of them standing in that room. "It does not." Clara took a slow step forward, closing the space between them, not out of impulse, but intention. The mark on her wrist pulsed once more, not brighter, not stronger, but in perfect rhythm with something unseen, something that connected her to this place, to him, to a past that refused to remain buried. "You said this was a promise," she continued, her eyes steady on his. "Then it was never broken." Victor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the smallest fracture in his control, revealing something deeper, something older than power or time. "It was ended," he corrected softly. "There is a difference." Clara held his gaze unshaken. "Not if it found its way back." The words settled between them, heavy, undeniable, and for the first time Victor did not answer immediately, because he knew she was right. Whatever had been sealed, whatever had been lost, had not remained gone. It had waited, and now it had returned, not as memory, not as legend, but as her. The air in the chamber shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as if the castle itself responded to that truth. The torches flickered once, then steadied, the shadows drawing back just enough to reveal the full space around them. Clara felt it, the acknowledgement, not from him, but from everything that surrounded them. "Then what was I before?" she asked quietly. "And what am I now?" Victor stepped closer until there was no distance left between them, his presence no longer distant, no longer guarded, but fully present, his gaze locked onto hers. With a clarity that left no room for doubt, before he said, his voice low and certain, "You were the reason I chose to believe this world could change." Clara's breath slowed, the words settling into her as something far deeper than explanation. "And now?" she asked. Victor did not look away. "Now you are the reason it will have to." The mark on her wrist pulsed once more, perfectly in sync with something unseen, something vast, something waking far beyond the walls of that chamber, and as the silence returned